If Facebook were around in the 1930s, it would have allowed Hitler to post 30-second ads on his solution to the Jewish problem. So here's a good standard and practice. Facebook, start fact-checking political ads before you run them.
Facebook has had a journey. It started as a college dating site, but today it seems to be becoming a factor in deciding leaders of a country. It's becoming a disinformation problem, not just for the US, but also in India. A recent investigative report by New York-based newspaper Wall Street Journal has made damning revelations about the platform's malfunctioning. The report says India's Facebook policy head Anki Das purposely avoided taking action against some BJP politicians for violating the company's hate speech policy. Former employees of Facebook told Wall Street Journal that Das did not want to upset the current establishment by banning its ministers on Facebook and was afraid of damaging the company's business prospects in the country. This is not the first instance. In the past, Facebook failed to act against inflammatory speeches by politicians inciting violence. India has struggled to punish Facebook for its inaction against hate speech. While Facebook clarified that it prohibits hate speech content and its policies are enforced globally, irrespective of political party affiliations, let's try and understand the complete truth behind these conjectures. Facebook's policies are not the same for all countries. It's heavily dependent on the political establishment of key markets. In 2017, German lawmakers passed a law that would penalize Facebook for publishing any hate speech content, and the company agreed to abide by the law. In fact, Facebook was forced to bow down to Singapore's fake news law, which allows the government to order online platforms to remove and correct what it deems to be fake news. Recently, Facebook caved into Vietnam government's orders to restrict anti-state content by dissidents. There's no denying that Facebook has been an important tool for pro-democracy movements. But now the platform has made it easier to disseminate misinformation than to correct it. Despite escalating complaints, Facebook continues to avoid answering hard questions from lawmakers around the world. Zuckerberg's sloganeering at elite events about tighter regulations isn't enough. His company has resources to engage meaningfully, and it must. Jessica Taneja, Democracy News Live, New Delhi. Hello and good evening. I'm Jessica Taneja. You're watching Democracy News Live, and this is our special program, It Matters. Facebook has been getting away with all the hate speech content it's been forwarding on its platform by the politicians or by the people or by agenda-driven groups. There are secret groups. There are not so secret groups. But the policy is intact. And what is it doing about the policy? Well, we have a very interesting panel joining us today. We have Saket Gokhale. He's a transparency activist and an investigator. We have Apar Gupta, who's the executive director of the Internet Freedom Foundation. Welcome to both of you.
Hi. Thank you.
Beginning with you, Saket. What do you make of this fiasco?
To be honest, as far as Facebook is concerned, there have been conversations going on for donkey's years now. Right from the 2016 US election, the allegations of Russian collusion in the American elections through the form of disinformation, be it through the Cambridge Analytica data breach. Facebook has been a very problematic entity, right since years. The new disclosure, though, from Wall Street India, and especially as far as India is concerned, it shows that the relationship between Facebook and the governments of countries where it operates has gotten sort of too close for comfort. It's not merely a business anymore. If you look at even the role of Anki Das, who's the public policy head, the role is described as being a lobbyist for Facebook with the Indian government and not really a person deciding what Facebook's policy should be like. So it's sort of unfortunate that Facebook's become this major behemoth. It's become an octopus with many tentacles that are embedded very deeply with the state, with corporate India, and also with in fact, even with independent media outlets. I mean, Facebook pretty much has a presence literally in every drawing room that you can see, and that is what has led us to this point. And what we don't realize is this is not just about a private company lobbying for its business interests. It has repercussions on Indian elections. It has repercussions on the moral fabric of our society. It has repercussions on things like law and order, and that's why it's important that these links be investigated into and they be looked into.
Right, interesting point there, Saket. Apar, he talks about the fact that there are repercussions on elections and democratic processes moving forward. So, Apar, if you could just weigh in and help us understand how can we regulate these platforms when it comes to disseminating information related to political activism, so to say, or forwarding kind of content which would harm the society in some or the other way. Let me give an example here. So in 2018 in Brazil, when Jair Bolsonaro was elected, his supporters were chanting Facebook, Facebook, WhatsApp, WhatsApp instead of the party or the leader they elected, because for them it was Facebook and WhatsApp which allowed their leader to be elected again in the election. So it's really surprising that Facebook says it has tighter regulations and it has policies in place. Where's the action?
So the first thing to remember about Facebook is that Facebook's largest global market is India. We are even bigger than the United States. So Facebook by itself has about close to 300 million active users, or so it claims. It has WhatsApp, which is part of Facebook Inc. as well, which has close to 300 million users, or so it claims, or even greater. We also have Instagram, which is again part of Facebook Inc., which has the highest amount of growth in core demographics of the population composing of 18 to 35 years old. So essentially, when you look at the Wall Street Journal article and the revelations made in it, there are two core claims made with regard to the injuries which are resulting today. The first relates to the existence of hate speech, and the second relates to interference with democratic processes. Both of these allegations become very disturbing because of the partisan application itself of the rules by Facebook. So it brings into question what is the oversight process? Do government institutions exist in terms of enforcing a rule of law, which means that there should be an even standard in application? And I would argue that doesn't happen. Because, first, with respect to elections by itself, the large platforms have gotten away with too much and too plenty. Because at present, under the Model Code of Conduct, the only regulation which is there is voluntary. It's a voluntary code which is in force, in which even Facebook itself does not get a direct takedown notice from the Election Commission, but there's an intermediary body called the Internet and Mobile Association, which facilitates these takedown notices. It is not responsible. It's not been brought under a system of regulation, and I think this needs to change now, if because it hasn't happened yesterday.
And Saket, look at what's been happening with the past few days when the Wall Street Journal report came out. Interestingly, the content or the hate speech content by BJP Minister T. Raja and Kapil Mishra was lying on Facebook. It wasn't removed until recently, when Wall Street Journal reporters pursued and approached Anki Das and her team, asking her whether this hate speech content could be allowed to stay on the platform. Only then it was removed. Why such delay in action? It's been months and months. Does it take a journalist to question your own policy implementation?
Now, you know what's astonishing, in fact, is at least as recently as yesterday, when Facebook put out a statement, they said that T. Raja's video is still under decision and not been deleted. So I'm not sure if the video has yet been deleted, because they still claim that they're going to make a decision. What I don't understand is the Wall Street Journal article clearly quotes a certain Adam Stone, who's a spokesperson of Facebook. It quotes him on the record saying that we globally, Facebook had asked Facebook India to take down the video, but Anki Das was the person who resisted against doing that. I don't see what they're still deciding today in terms of taking down the video. It's against Facebook Global's hate speech policies. Facebook Global has informed Facebook India that the video needs to be taken down. It's clearly inflammatory. I mean, you don't really need somebody to tell you that. So why is that video still online? Why does it take so long to take it down? And these are just one or two instances. You know, T. Raja or Kapil Mishra, these are just one or two instances. Today, you will see a lot of influencers, especially influencers from the right wing, who are going out and constantly putting videos out on Facebook. They're doing video lives. These might not be significant leaders, but these are people who command audiences of a few hundred thousands. These are people who influence. I mean, I recently, today morning, somebody sent me a very problematic video about there's a certain guy called Hindustani Bhau or something, someone on the internet. This gentleman was a Big Boss contestant. This he gets a few million views on his video, and he has some of the worst religious polarized, dripping with hate, misogynistic speech, and it never gets taken down. So why are these people being given a free hand? I mean, I refuse to believe that none of this is being reported. I mean, I've reported many instances of such content on Facebook, but it never gets taken down.
Absolutely, and there was one instance, if I can recall, was when Zuckerberg himself said that Holocaust deniers, their accounts and their posts won't be taken down. I think one can draw a fair analogy there that this is both worrying and it creates disruption of sorts when it comes to such content thriving on a platform. In India alone, we have 300 million active users. I mean, where are you taking this?
No, see, that's the thing. I mean, it's been the same thing in the US recently when Trump put out a tweet where he was talking about the Black Lives Matter movements and said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And Twitter immediately censored that tweet. They put a notice up there, and Twitter took action. Whereas on the same content posted on Facebook, Zuckerberg refused to take it down, and he said, "No, we believe in keeping it up there." It's not even about freedom of speech. Even that's not an argument that Facebook can take, because I'll give you a simple example to everybody watching this. I suggest you go to your Facebook, and if you're a feminist or a person who cares about feminist causes, or if you're just angry and you write the phrase "men are trash" and post it, the algorithm's going to take it down within 30 seconds. It's happened to me. It takes it down within 30 seconds. So it's not about freedom of expression. It's far from it. A feminist today or a person saying men are trash, that gets taken down in 30 seconds. You might even get banned for doing that. But if you were to go out and put a Hail Hitler, or you talk about white supremacy, or you talk about, ethnic cleansing of Rohingya, or you talk about Hindu Muslim, no, none of that.
Myanmar is a good example for that. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I want to add in here.
Yeah,
What we've been missing.
Absolutely, go ahead, Saket.
What we've been missing for the last few days is also the fact that while we're talking about India, Anki Das is the Facebook policy director for South Asia, which means whatever Facebook has done in Myanmar and Sri Lanka has also been under her ambit. And Facebook has publicly come out and said that hate was used on their platform in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, and this happened on Anki Das's watch.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, in Myanmar, in fact, there was a free Facebook giveaway as well on smartphones, wasn't it? There was a whole ad run on television saying that Facebook comes free. Well, worrying enough. Yes. Also, Apar, we're talking about freedom of speech here, because Zuckerberg believes that there is freedom of speech and all kinds of content should be there on the platform. Well, my question here is that there is a thin line between freedom of speech and ensuring that a social media platform is free from misinformation. So, what has Facebook done to ensure that the democratic discourse remains unharmed?
So, I think in any democracy, speech by itself does not by always within the boundaries of freedom of speech. And there have always been restrictions towards it. Now, I come back to the point I was making initially, which is there in the Wall Street Journal article. Number one, hate speech is a very well carved out category in international human rights law, even under our local law. even under United States law, which has a very high degree of toleration towards uh, the freedom of speech and expression under the First Amendment. Hate speech is a very clearly demarcated exceptional category. The second is restrictions with regard to speech when they relate to election interference is another very well demarcated category where there are obligations to act to prevent that the nature of democracy is not undermined. What has Facebook done? And to discover that, I think we truly do need, given these revelations of partisan conduct by the local India staff and their engagement in it, an independent inquiry such as a human rights audit, which goes over and above the regular processes that they
But
follow.
Apart, if you
Whether they
remember, he was summoned last year. He didn't show up.
no,
There were
but I
issues
think
raised by joint parliamentary, committee,
so.
but
So, I,
they have
so
tried their best to bring Zuckerberg on the table, but he
no,
hasn't, and
no,
he
they
would
have not.
happily go to a U.S. congressional, meeting. Why?
So the Standing Committee on IT has never summoned Mr. Mark Zuckerberg. They did summon Jack Dorsey. Instead of Jack Dorsey, there was another public policy professional from Twitter who came from Twitter Global towards India. But there's never been a direct summon towards Mark Zuckerberg or any person from the Facebook global team till
All right,
now.
I
And
stand corrected,
I
but even if it hasn't,
and I think,
what's taking
and
it
I
so?
think
What's
the
taking so
parliamentary
long to
committee.
to
No,
summon him
no,
and get him to India to answer
yeah,
all these
yeah.
questions?
So we did write a letter yesterday to the Parliamentary Standing Committee. We have recommended summons towards them, and if that doesn't happen, I think the Privileges Committee of Parliament can definitely follow that through. I do want to just complete one point. I think Facebook Global has done a civil rights audit of Facebook USA, which was released on July 6, 2020, which pointed out several deficiencies. It went through the internal processes, the emails. I think we need a similar human rights audit of its India team. Its staff does need to be put on notice. It needs to be investigated. All of it needs to be done in a manner which is transparent and preferably under a person who enjoys confidence of the civil rights community and the civil society activist, somebody like a retired judge like Justice A.P. Shah. There are too many partisan allegations, both from Congress and BJP. We need to step beyond and make sure that when 300 million Indians are using Facebook, they get to do it safely.
Right, and Saket, when we talk about government interference in private organizations like this, where Facebook algorithm pushes their content and otherwise, when organizations like these are hand in glove with the government, what can you expect?
No, it's terrible. In fact, I wrote on Friday to Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who's the chairperson of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on INT, and that's the reason I requested for a parliamentary probe in the first place. Because when the government itself isn't accused, you really cannot expect an impartial and unbiased inquiry, conducted by the government. The problem
Perhaps.
here is that the financial intricacy is too much between Facebook and the government of India. And the second problem is that the government of India today and the Bharatiya Janata Party as a political party are completely indivisible from each other. You can't recognize the difference. There is no line separating them. And that is also another cause for problem today, because whether something's being done on the behest of the Bharatiya Janata Party or on the behest of the government of India, it's very hard to determine these days. I mean, you don't know who the players are. To give you a simple example of what happens with this amount of government closeness, is I'll give a very short anecdote. In 2017, the Election Commission of India had said that it was reviewing its ties with Facebook, where because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal and all the data breach allegations. 5 days later, the Election Commission again came back and said, no, we're not reviewing it anymore because these data breaches are just an aberration. Now, of course, we need more evidence, but Facebook's campaign with the Election Commission started with identifying people who are voters or people who are going to vote in incoming elections. They would give you a button and they would ask you, have you registered to vote and are you going to be voting? Now, just think for a moment what this can do. Okay. If Facebook is colluding with the ruling party or a party, it knows the profile of people who are going to be voting. It knows where elections are happening. It can very easily tailor its algorithm to ensure that pro ruling party propaganda is shown to these individuals. And I'm not saying this out of speculation, because Facebook itself had conducted a very notorious study once where it altered its algorithm to the point where, if you saw, they claimed, if you saw positive things on your news feed, you feel positive, and if you saw negative things on your news feed, you feel negative. And they actually tweaked the algorithm to show certain things to the people who were part of this unofficial study. So it's a fact that Facebook can tweak its algorithm. That is something that Facebook itself has admitted. Now imagine today you're telling Facebook that, yes, I'm going to register to vote, and you click on that button, and Facebook is colluding with the political party, and you start getting shown propaganda by that political party. Where is the level playing field as far as the free and, free democracy or free and fair elections are concerned? Where is the level playing field there?
Very interestingly pointed out there, Saket. In the past there were protest movements. Were used. Social media platforms. Thrived. I mean, in fact, protest movements thrived on social media. Say, for instance, the Green Movement or the Arab Spring. Would you perhaps agree that its nature is not democratizing anymore?
No, it's not. Nope, nope. I mean, unless we are willing to say that the majority of the population has hate in their hearts, and that is what has happened in the last 6 years in India, and therefore all the hate that we see is actually very democratic, and that's what our society has become. I don't believe that, though. Though the BJP might like to argue that, but I don't believe so.
Right, and apart,
No,
coming back to you, Facebook
no, yeah.
talks about its
One-
hate speech
just,
policy, and
just
it says
picking
that
up,
it has a very.
sorry, just picking up on what Saket was also saying.
All right.
I just like
Okay.
to add one layer of
Sure, go
research
ahead.
which is coming up is that uh, social media consumption beyond the point also drives a very polarized set of views. And that by itself results in a level of fracture in any society which has a level of diversity. What this is basically means that if you're consuming news which is towards a certain spectrum, be it right or left, it keeps getting more and more extreme because the algorithm is suited towards profiling you and then serving you a set of information which confirms your existing bias. And it does it because the platform wants to maintain as long your attention as long as it can to serve you ads. And all of this is being done on YouTube, all of this is being done on Facebook, because they are essentially advertising platforms. So the problem with them is much more fundamental than just being surveyors of hate speech and not taking down content. It's also a much more fundamental architectural problem in which they are basically ad networks which need to maintain as long as your attention can be maintained on them, which is why they have infinite scroll and you don't have a sense of time, how long you've spent time on it. Because the more time you spend on them, the more personal data they gather. The more personal data they gather, they can serve it to an advertiser. The biggest advertisers are political parties. Political parties' spends are not properly captured. They flow through passages of dark money, and also the platforms by themselves don't reasonably disclose it. It's a very broken system from the side of Facebook towards our political system and the government regulators in the middle. So, we are looking at a fundamental reset at several levels here. But at the very least, what is required today from the WSJ story is an independent investigation into Facebook. This larger problem can be addressed in time, but we need to start with smaller steps with regard to the role of the India office, what it's done and what it's not done as per its own stated policies. And that truth can only come out when it's independently investigated. I do side with Saket's viewpoint that I do not think that the government investigation processes will go ahead to a certain degree of outcome, because in Cambridge Analytica also there is a pending criminal investigation with the Central Bureau of Investigation, which has not in fact made any progress for 1.5 years at the very least.
Right, and Saket, what can be done here? It's a simple question. What can be done here? What would you like to tell Facebook users and how to be careful with what kind of content they're reading?
Look, I've been seeing a lot of tweets or posts the last few days which are talking about, boycotting Facebook, or people sort of saying, we're not going to use Facebook anymore. I think that defeats the point. I think that just literally gives Facebook and the BJP what they allegedly wanted is for the saner voices to quit the platform. Quitting the platform is not a solution. And what's important is, yes, there is hate content. Yes, the Facebook claims there are reporting mechanisms, but I think what also needs to slowly start happening is that this reporting, if Facebook's reporting is not working, and if there is something which is clearly insightful, I think it's also time we need to start getting the police involved. Our police are very understaffed. Our cyber cells across the country are incredibly under resourced and incredibly understaffed. And I'll give you a simple example of how proactive action can even help the police. Recently, when there were riots in Bangalore, because somebody posted a very communally charged Facebook post, question number one, why was it not taken down by Facebook? Had Facebook taken it down at the right time, it would not have led to riots in Bangalore. But if you report something and it doesn't get taken down, I think people really need to start approaching the police. And also, there needs to be some sensitization in, at least in non BJP states, where police need to be informed about the urgency of offenses happening on social media. Today the police are overworked, they're tired, they probably don't pay too much attention to offenses that are happening on social media, saying it's an anonymous person, probably sitting in another corner of the country. But if Facebook is not willing to self regulate, then at some point when it's a clear crime, I mean, I do not believe in government regulation of any independent platform. That's a recipe for disaster. But when there's a clear crime being committed, when there is child porn being distributed or hate speeches being or gory images being showed, at that point, I think the police then need to step in and book Facebook as an intermediary for allowing that content to be on its platform. And there's a little bit of a precedent we've had in the last couple of weeks. Until now, platforms have said that, oh, we are intermediaries, we have no control over the content. But when the suo moto contempt case against Mr. Prashant Bhushan was taken up by the Supreme Court, Twitter, without even being given an order, just went back and withheld all his tweets. So the question is that these platforms on one side say that, okay, we're not in charge of the content. But in incidents like these, they suddenly, even before getting an order, do take down that content. So they can be proactive. So the question is, why aren't they so proactive about hate speech the way they are proactive about taking down Mr. Prashant Bhushan's tweets? So that's a big question there.
It is. I think that's what you call controlled freedom of speech. Allow everything and anything, but not, have all the content which probably propagates hate and in the future violence as well on the streets. We've seen that as an example. There are no more fact checks required for that. Thank you, both of you, for joining us on the program. It was a really enlightening discussion. Hope to have you in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.